starting with this Times story. Wes Streeting, I think, seeing where the public are, which is very worried about the strikes and the disruption it causes, appealing directly to the doctors around the BMA, who have called another ballot saying they want 29%, not 4%, 5%, that asking the resident doctors to go out on strike. Is it going to work for Wes Streeting to ask the doctors to put the NHS first? Well, he's obviously hoping it works, and he's hoping that these junior doctors who are about to ballot for strike think carefully before making the decision whether they go on strike or not. Of course, the junior doctors got a big 22% pay rise last year.
That was over 3 years, though. It wasn't...
Yeah, but that's... Sure. I mean, it was more than other parts of the public sector. It was a huge increase. In recognition that over many, many years, junior doctors' pay has not kept up with the norms, the expectations, and it's a very, very hard job. It's a very pressured job. But the Labour government is putting more investment into the NHS to get things moving. It has put more investment into the pay of doctors and nurses and other health professionals. And Wes Streeting is saying, look, don't go on strike, because that's going to hold back the progress we have made. So
what I found very interesting was that when we look back to last year, one of the things the government said about the pay increases, people like me were saying, hang on a sec, these pay increases are too much. But they said, we'll give them good pay increases because it'll stop strikes. That was one of the key arguments that they made. And what's happened is the opposite. And if you look at the money which the Chancellor put into the NHS in the first year, a very high proportion of that extra money went into pay. Yeah, and it does generally. But I was just interested to see, because I was on the programme last year saying exactly this, saying I didn't think it would stop strikes. And what's happened is that they've come in for 29%. Yeah, now, they don't think they're going to get 29%. That's just their bargaining position. Yeah. But they hope to get probably high single digits, maybe low double digits. But, I mean, the BMA is basically a trade union. Remember, the trade union leadership saying they want a strike isn't necessarily where their members might be. The members have got to vote to decide whether to go on strike. But I also know from my... And has the BMA changed, the junior doctors, the resident doctors' approach of the BMA changed? Have their tactics changed over the last few years in your experience? Well, you know, trade unions, understandably, in the context of a world of when we've had very high inflation, are always going to try and get the best deal for their members. That's what a trade union is supposed to do, you know, and that's a good thing. You know, whether the government caves into them is another question. Yes, exactly. And there's no way that the Treasury, given the fact they've had the U-turn on the benefits, there's no capacity for them to have massive pay increases for the unions. OK. And so something's going to have to give. But what we don't want to give is we don't want to lose resident doctors. Sure. We don't want to lose these people. And between September 2022 and September 2023, up to 23,000 doctors left the National Health Service prematurely. And the BMA estimates, and bear in mind this is the BMA, of course, the trade union representing the doctors, but let's take this estimate at face value. The cost of replacing these doctors is between 1.6 and 2.4 billion pounds. We do not want to lose doctors. We want to value doctors. I mean, my goodness, they could not be doing a more important job. That's not true, Susanna. They look after us, they save our lives, they protect us, and that means that we are well enough to produce a thriving economy. So what? When you say something has to give, we don't want the NHS to give. Well, you're absolutely right. And by the way, I just want to thank all the doctors and nurses and NHS staff who looked after my own daughter this bank holiday weekend, who fell off her bike and broke both her wrists. So thank you to King's Mill Hospital near Mansfield. Is she doing okay? She's okay. Good. She's getting on with it. She's a tough little thing. But thank you to everybody at King's Mill Hospital in Mansfield who looked after her, because she was up near at her cousin's. But you're right. But also, when I was the Shadow Health Secretary, I knew that we were losing NHS staff. We got shortages of, I think, about 100,000 of docs, nurses, paramedics and so on. But the staff in the NHS would always say it's not just about their pay, though pay is important. It's about the overall conditions, and they're under such pressure. And this government is trying to turn around the NHS. It's putting more investment into the NHS as well. It's trying to improve their terms and conditions. It's trying to improve their training opportunities. It's trying to relieve the pressures on them. So I think, look, I think Wes Streeting is right to say, don't take industrial action now. Let's work together to improve things for patients and for the staff as well.
So I think that if they do decide to strike, I think it'll be a big slap in the face for the government, simply because they got pay increases way above inflation last year.
Yeah.
And the whole premise of that was that they wouldn't go on strike once they'd been given the money. So I think it's a big reverse. The other thing I want to say about this is that, you know, given the tight fiscal situation, obviously Wes is the health secretary and he's taking the kind of, he's fronting this debate. But the Treasury will be extremely nervous. I mean, Ed will know this, about any concessions to the doctors. And they will be saying, under no circumstances can we give them any more money.
Because
that's
then,
the reality.
do nurses ask for more money? Do the paramedics
You've
ask
got
for
a big
more
problem.
money?
Everyone in the public sector, in the trade union...
Yeah.
And
why are
public
you
sector,
treating doctors as a
100%.
special case?
And
We all contribute.
And you've also done reversals, U-turns, on the big benefits decisions, which they did on the grounds that, OK, we need to save money, so we're going to... So the whole public sector spending settlement will be blown apart.
But this is why we have independent pay review bodies in the public sector, to try and avoid it being, especially when you have, like, a huge employer and where people depend upon the services, whether that's policing or nursing or doctors. You have independent pay review bodies to make an assessment, make a recommendation. Last year, the government accepted the pay review bodies. There was some criticism of that. The BMA here seemed to be saying, ignore what the independent pay review body said. Yeah. We want a bigger pay rise, and I'm not sure that's something the Treasury can put up.
No, they can't. But for the reason they're doing that, and I don't think they should take this action, but the reason they're doing it is that for years and years and years, the pay review bodies were making recommendations, and the Conservative chancellors at the time, George Osborne and others, kept ignoring it and kept giving them pay freezes or very small pay increases. So they're now saying we need to get it back, we need to get our money back. But as Kwasi says...
But isn't that the pay review body's job to work out how to do that rather than them in, putting operations at risk?
Well, I mean, well, yes, but, again, they're a trade union, and a trade union leadership has to try and get the best deal for its members. But I don't think this is the right tactic.
Well, what we haven't spoken about is that if you look at the military, they cannot strike. They're not, under law, they can't do it. And the police themselves, they cannot strike legally. And I think there is a debate about, people in very, very critically important roles, and they're being allowed to strike in this way, because, they could bring the whole system down, as Wes Streeting has said.
Yeah, no, but people should be allowed to strike. I mean, it is...
Look, I'm not taking away that right.
There are certain emergency... But the police can't strike,
services.
Military can't strike. It's our debate this morning whether we should ban doctors, health workers...
Well, no, I think people have the right to go on strike to try and get a better deal for themselves.
Yeah, but
that's important in a labour market.
But some professions aren't allowed to do that.
No, and actually, historically, you don't tend to have had these big strikes in the NHS historically. I mean, you've obviously had them over the years, but not... It's a more recent phenomenon, but that's because we've been coming out of this period of very high inflation and pay restraint.
Are you actually saying that doctors should be banned, legally banned from striking?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that when you're looking at someone asking for 30%, that's what they're asking for, 29%. I think it is legitimate to have a debate as to whether these people in critically important roles should be allowed to strike. And as you said, soldiers and policemen and women aren't allowed to do that.
But it's quite hard to go on strike now. I mean, there's a lot of rules around, the levels of the numbers of people who have to, the levels at the ballot, what you have to get in the ballot, the numbers of people, what they vote at.
Yeah,
and actually, when people go on strike,
these doctors went on strike, of course, back in March 2023 up until last July, 44 days of industrial action, and caused the cancellation of 1.5 million appointments.
And then they got the pay increase. They got the pay increase, and
so it's worked out for them. Didn't work out for those 1.5 million appointments and operations.
Well, that's obviously why Wes Streeting is saying don't do this.
Right.
No, he's right.
Yeah.
He's right.
But Kwasi, when you say it's legitimate to have a debate, and the good thing is, that now you're a former chancellor.
Yeah.
You don't have to follow a party line.
No, I don't have
Jonathan
to follow
has said that I'm having the debate, doctors should be able to strike. What are you saying?
I'm saying that... I don't know actually what I think about this. Okay. I mean, I have to be very frank.
That's actually a very good answer, which politicians don't normally get.
No, but I'm not
I mean, it's a really good way of avoiding answering the question.
It's a six of one, half a dozen of the other. It's a very finely balanced debate.
So maybe if Jonathan and Susanna have a debate, you could decide on the basis.
I could judge.
Yes, that's right.
Judge Kwasi.
I don't have to have a view on absolutely everything that occurs.
Although in your role on News Panel, You sort of do have to. That's why we bring you into the studio.
Yeah, that's true. But on this particular issue, I think it's a finely balanced debate.
I think everyone's right.
Really, really
I mean, I honestly...
Is that reasonable?
No, I actually agree with you. Because, you know, of course, in the case of police and the military, they can't.
It's clear.
In firefighters, they do, but that causes huge problems when they go on strike. And there aren't really alternative firefighters which you can bring in. In the case of doctors, as you said, doctors do have the opportunity to kind of go to other places to get other jobs. That is not available for police and the military. The truth is, if you took the right to strike away, you'd probably have to compensate by paying them more.
You probably would.
And that actually would make things harder.
It could make things harder.
We are going to be debating that, which will be helpful for you.
I might have made my mind up by then.
By the end of the show.
By the end of the show.
We'll be debating that after 7 o'clock. Can I ask a question? Presumably resident doctors have bleepers still. Or some form of alert which would make them wake up if they needed to be on shift. That facility wasn't being used by the Heathrow boss.
Yeah, I was amazed.
When back in March, the chief executive was called when the fire broke out, but slept through all the calls.
I was astonished.
Mortifying for him. Absolutely mortifying.
No, but the even more mortifying thing is that the independent investigation said that if he had woken up, it would have made no difference to anything.
No, but you should be...
They would have carried on, they'd have done everything they did anyway, and you think, well, in that case, what's the point of him?
But he should have been alerted. He should have been... Of course, you know, he should have been awake. And,
of course he should.
You know, this is bad things are happening.
So the fire began at 11:20 at night. And so, obviously, the chief operating officer then tried to call the boss, but couldn't get through.
His phone was on silent.
His phone was on mute.
I know.
And was
Not a mistake we ever make.
And was on mute for more than 7 hours.
That's insane.
I mean, it is extraordinary when you're in a big job. But isn't it also a reminder, though, how nobody has landlines anymore?
No.
Because obviously trying to get him on his mobile. But in the old days, they've had a landline which should have rung.
That's right, which you couldn't mute unless you pulled it out.
Nobody has a landline anymore. And if you do, and someone rings it, you think, who's ringing my landline?
We still have a landline. Never use it. But I sort of feel like...
Does anyone know the number?
You've still got the landline.
If you got rid of it, I mean, you know...
I don't have a landline anymore.
Who rings you on your landline?
Nobody.
Do you ring anyone on it?
People from foreign countries asking me to get involved in surveys I don't want to get involved in. It's all that ever happened.
That's
but
not
I've never
useful.
ever managed to cross.
So the thing about this Heathrow boss, I mean, he was paid what, £3.2 million last year? I mean, it's a lot of money, and for him just to switch the phone off, I think was a bit irresponsible.
I think that all of us sort of boomers, Gen Xers, have to work out the settings on our phones so that they mute most things, but the key notification, which would be a call from Heathrow to say possibly something's on fire, would be able to get through.
Can you do that with your phone?
Yes. Oh. So I have got everything...
You've worked that out?
Overnight, I've got everything muted, apart from my children, so they can get through.
They can get through.
Yeah. And
also, what you could do is you could give to your PA, if you were the chief executive of a big, massive company, you could give them Find My iPhone access, and they could then press the button which says Find My Phone, and then your phone would bleep, even if it was on silent.
Really?
That is another way around it.
I didn't know you could do all this.
It could have been a much... But what's sad about this is that it could have been a much worse accident. I mean, if things had blown up and people had been killed and he was still asleep and no one could get through to him, that's terrible.
If you were the Chancellor of the Exchequer, would you ever... You don't
sleep.
On silent.
You don't sleep
at all.
I know. There were sleepless nights.
Quasi at 3 in the morning. What do I think? Yes, no, strike, not strike.
You would know.
Yes. There is also the option, of course, of someone going round to the house and knocking very... Which is what happens if any of us miss our alarm. Then somebody will come round and knock on the door. Right, over the course of last night, a series of powerful messages were projected onto key landmarks, including St Pancras Station, which is the train station in Sir Keir Starmer's constituency of Holborn and St Pancras, sending a message, stop the cruel cuts. 119,000 people have signed a 38 Degrees petition calling on the government to reverse the planned cuts to welfare benefits, which are going to be debated in Parliament. You've already referenced this, of course, this morning, Kwasi. Does this kind of stunt have an impact? Tax the super-rich instead? I mean, I asked one of the government ministers this morning the fact that, they've already suggested We know the winter fuel allowance is going to be reversed. It's likely the two-child benefit cap is going to be lifted. That's £5 billion of cuts which need to be paid for. Our taxes coming in. Is this going to contribute to that, or will he just
So, look, I think
mute
it adds to the pressure on the government, for sure. You've got a Labour Party, a Labour government, which is quite split. I think the left of the party wants to see higher taxes on richer people, frankly, and they don't want to see the cuts on benefits. I think the government initially obviously wanted to reduce benefits, but they're in a tricky spot now. And I don't know how that debate is going to be resolved. I suspect that the taxes will go up.
Right.
They could even put in additional taxes on richer people.
What would be the leeway on tax, Jonathan? Where do you think taxes might be targeted?
Well, there's a few things going on here. There's definitely problems with the universal credit system, which, the way it's structured at the moment, disincentivises people trying to find work at the job centre. And that's what the government is trying to tackle. Then there's also huge numbers of people since the pandemic have gone on to the various different incapacity and disability benefits. And we're sort of out of step with a lot of other European countries on that. So, again, the government is trying to tackle that. But then you've also got increases in child poverty, and it looks like the government is going to move on a policy which I think is a really nasty policy, something called the two-child limit. Speculation that the government's now going to move on that. We hope it does, but it's not been confirmed.
Bridget Phillipson told us it was on the table.
But the assessment of the welfare disability reforms, which the government published, its own assessment says it will increase child poverty by hundreds of thousands.
If it can't get people into work. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's why Labour MPs...
He said child poverty will go up.
Yeah. And that's why Labour MPs and a lot of Labour campaigners and people who are more sort of aligned to that sort of view of the world are saying, get rid of this two-child policy. And it sounds like the government are going to do that. There's lots of suggestions of that. But again, where's the money coming from for some of these? Now, Gordon Brown has been out there this week saying, look at the big gambling firms or look at banks and see if you can get more tax out of them. Because Rachel Reeves has said, I'm not putting up VAT, I'm not putting up income tax, I'm not putting up national insurance.
And you're looking at...
And she's going to make it all add up.
They're going to be going towards, I think, a mansion tax, capital taxes, taxes on people's property. That's the sort of thing that I'm sure will be looked at.
How would that work?
So, you know, you have a threshold... let's say it's £1.5 million, which is a huge amount of money.
Of a property that somebody already owns.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then you put
not an increase in
and other
stamp
countries
duty
do no.
when you're buying.
But other countries do this, where essentially you pay maybe 0.5% on the value of the property.
You could do it as just a new higher rate on council tax.
Well, I think that's the thing, because when you look at it, why does a very nice, posh, well-to-do flat in posh bits of London like Kensington pay less council tax than a flat or a small terrace house in Grimsby? I mean, the council tax system is mad because it's not actually been reviewed for, like, 35 years or something. Now, I don't know if the government will do it, I've got no idea, but if I was them, I'd be seriously looking at it.
This is going to be looked at.
Right.
When we were in government, we didn't do it, and when Kwasi was in government, we didn't do it.
No, we didn't do it.
It's such a can of worms looking at the council tax system, so we look at it and think...
It's difficult to do, but, you know, the other thing in London, which I did have some sympathy for this argument, is that people have had huge increases in the value of their property.
Yeah.
And that wasn't because they were great entrepreneurs. That was just because they were lucky enough to have properties 30 years ago. And they're paying very, very little tax on them.
Yeah. The trouble with the mansion tax is that, of course, just because you live in a very expensive house doesn't mean you're earning anymore.
Exactly right. And I think that's the problem that we had with the old rates. I mean, those of us who are old enough to remember, you'd had the widow in a 10-bedroom house.
There is a way around it, but it's hard.
It's hard to figure that out.
Yes.
And I think the other thing is that, you know, we read about very rich people leaving the country. So instead of paying tax here, they're going to go off to Italy and pay, or wherever,
and pay
their tax, or Dubai and pay their tax.
Yeah. Can I just go back to the question you asked, though, which is we were seeing the pictures there of those messages being projected onto St Pancras Station. 38 Degrees, the campaign organisation, they crowd-funded thousands of members of the public who made small donations, an average of £8.45 each, in order to pay for these messages to be emblazoned. Now, if you're an MP and you get letters from constituents, or if you get letters via 38 Degrees from constituents on this issue, you have to reply to them, that increases the pressure. Is it value for money for members of the public to give money to have these things in...
well, that's up to the members of the public.
I mean,
what do you think? Is it a good...
I wouldn't put money to that.
Do you think it would make any difference to you as Chancellor?
Sure.
Or as an MP if you saw that as you drove past it?
So the fact that we're debating this suggests that they're making an impact.
Correct.
Because if they hadn't put those things on the St Pancras, whatever, we wouldn't be talking about it. So they're clearly having some effect. And MPs looking at this will be frightened. They'll be calling up the ministers and the government and saying, we've got a problem here.
So good campaign from 38 Degrees.
Well, that campaign will be delighted that it's on GMB.
That's right.
Britain's premier breakfast TV
100%.
They'll be even more delighted that when I asked the question, is it value for money, you're both saying definitely.
Well, I said I would never do that.
I thought you said it was.
No,
it's on national
I wouldn't pay
No,
my...
you mean as an individual. You would never
do
pay
that.
towards it. But as a campaign, they've just effectively...
They're making some impact.
They've bought 5 minutes of commercial airtime on the Premier commercial
they'll be delighted
network.
with that.
They'll be happy.
And it's a really important issue. So
but I think the real nub of it will be what the MPs do and where the Labour MPs are on an issue like this.
Well,
you're
right, but here's an interesting thing. I don't know if the Conservatives are going to support this or not. I mean, you'd expect Conservatives to support it, but there's going to become a vote in Parliament. Lots of Labour MPs are talking about rebelling on this vote. So then it comes down to, do the Conservatives very opportunistically vote against, or do they vote in favour of it?
Jonathan, isn't there a fundamental thing here that the government is the one in the dock and the opposition will cause trouble where they can? It's a Labour government. Labour governments are supposed to get people back to work.
Yes.
So if you can get people off incapacity into work by supporting them, good thing. Labour governments are not supposed to increase child poverty.
No, absolutely, and I feel strongly on that, which is why I hope they do shift on this two-child policy.
No, but the disability reforms are also going to increase child poverty.
Yeah, but the government's not yet assessed the impact of getting rid of the two-child limit and maybe doing some other changes.
But your point about the opposition shows that this is going to be a parliamentary battle, and it sounds very esoteric and irrelevant to people, but actually it'll be crucially important because it'll set the frame for the budget in the autumn.
Can I talk about... We've talked about ITV and its funding. Can we talk about the BBC and its funding? Because the I newspaper this morning says the BBC is operating an unofficial amnesty for pensioners over the age of 75 who are not paying the licence fee, meaning that they will not face prosecution. They used to get it free. It free. That was withdrawn. Felt very unfair to lots of people, particularly if you were over 75. BBC doesn't seem to be facing or pursuing prosecutions of these people. There is an argument, Kwasi, about the fact that a lot of people find it extraordinary that it's criminalised at all not paying for the BBC.
Yeah, I've always been and I do have strong views about this. You'll be pleased.
Good.
I've never believed in the licence fee. I think it's absurd in 2025 that you have essentially a poll tax to support the national broadcaster in that way. And
How would you fund the BBC?
I think it should be done like every other channel in terms of subscriptions, maybe advertising.
Do you think that is something that might be happening in a few years' time? Licence fee renewal talks presumably going on all the time.
I'd be very surprised.
But younger people, anecdotally, are probably unlikely to pay the licence fee.
They won't pay it. I mean, they can stream stuff. They're on YouTube. I mean, they watch lots of televisual material, but the extent to which they watch television is doubtful. You know, they're not watching television. People under the age of 40, under the age of 30.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you think?
Well, I mean, young people are watching YouTube. I mean, that's what
they don't think they watch the BBC.
No,
even though they probably do.
Yeah, they're watching BBC content on YouTube.
But it's on YouTube and another
TikTok
streaming.
And all that.
You know, the world has changed so much. There used to be 3 channels, then there were 4 channels. And in that world, you know, you can see why the BBC, which had 2 of the channels, was supported by the taxpayer.
But I think... I mean,
50 years on, 40 years on, I don't see that argument.
I think it's really important that we have a vibrant public service broadcaster with the BBC, and I think the model is a good model. I would keep it. Look, it's under huge pressures because of the changing habits, and these things will be looked again in 10, 20, 30 years, I am sure. But I think we would lose something if we lost the BBC as a country.
But surely there must be another way to pay for it than just to have essentially what is a poll tax.
But it's not Netflix, is it? It's the BBC.
You know, there's going to be
it does so much more than just be a TV channel.
No, I'm not saying
like
it's
local radio
thing, but I'm just looking at the way you fund it.
Yeah. Yes.
And we've basically got a poll tax.
Yeah. That's quite a derogatory way of describing it.
That's what it is.
But it's a strong view, Kwasi, and that's what we were asking for.
That's what it is.
Thank you both very much indeed.